This is the Youth Baseball Edge podcast with Rob Tong, session number 2.
Get in the know and get the edge. It's the Youth Baseball Edge podcast. And now, your host, Rob Tong.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Rob Tong here. Thank you so much for joining me for session 2 today. We are going to be talking with a guest today who has written fairly extensively about human psychology recently, and I personally find it fascinating to peer inside the human brain. In this episode, I'm going to be picking our guest's brain, pun partially intended, about how to apply a deeper understanding of human behavior within the confines of youth baseball. My goal is to find out whether this better understanding of the human brain can help us coaches unlock hidden potential in our kids that we may not otherwise be able to untap. I think the mental game of baseball doesn't just apply to players, but also to coaches. And be sure to stick around until the end of the episode because our guest will be giving away a copy of his book for free, even the shipping, and I'll explain how you can try to win that book. I also have a really exciting announcement to make at the end of the episode, so you'll want to listen to the end to find out what that is. Now, let's bring on our guest. Now, I'm so excited because my guest today has more accomplishments than Kanye West has mirrors in his house. He won a Pulitzer Prize, I guess is the proper way to say it, in 1991 for investigative reporting on medical malpractice. He's written for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Sunday Times of London. He was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard and has taught at numerous colleges, including Vanderbilt University. He's been on many radio and TV programs, including NPR, The O'Reilly Factor, Colorful Conversations on CNN, and CBS News Sunday Morning. He's written 3 acclaimed books, Going Up the River, Why We Make Mistakes, and Kidding Ourselves, The Hidden Power of Self-Deception. Whew, I am out of breath. But of most importance to you, he is also a passionate youth baseball coach. I am so glad to welcome Joe Hallinan on the show. Joe, how are you doing today?
Hey, Rob, great. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have someone of your stature on the show. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about your journey in youth baseball, both as a parent, since one of your kids is playing, and also as a coach.
Sure. I mean, I guess the journey began when I was a kid, when I was about 13, and I played. And unfortunately, I wasn't very good, but that probably taught me some things along the way. And then there was a long gap. And then I became a parent, as you know, first to my son, Jack, and then to my daughters, Annie and Katie. And Jack, you were his first coach. You were actually my role model for coaching back when you first started with Jack, when I guess he was, I'm trying to think, 8 years old, I believe, perhaps even 7.
Yeah, that's right.
And that got me involved there. And then I've helped out coaching his teams ever since. He's about to turn 14 next week. And then I've also helped on my daughter's teams. They're both now playing softball as well. So I guess all in all, maybe about 10 coaching years of experience in there.
That's a pretty long time. It's a lot more than most coaches who have started around. So before we delve into the world of youth baseball, I'd like our audience to get to know you, Joe Hallinan, a little bit better with some lightning style questions, kind of about me questions, followed by some word association questions. Are you ready, Joe?
I'll try not to say anything embarrassing.
Okay. So tell us, what's your favorite baseball team?
Currently the Cubs. When I was a kid, it used to be some others, but Cubs now.
Okay. Morning person or night person?
Used to be night person, but the older I got with kids, now I'm a morning person.
All right. Favorite baseball player?
Growing up, probably Johnny Bench.
Johnny Bench. All right. Favorite food dish?
Ooh, pizza.
How about favorite music artist?
Yeah, lately, John Prine, Willie Nelson, I guess, 2 guys I've been listening to a lot.
Favorite vacation spot?
Oh, a hidden lake up north where I go fishing.
Up north, whereabouts?
Canada, Minnesota line, right on the border.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite book?
Favorite book? Sounds a little bit corny, but probably the Bible. I read it a lot.
Really? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? It's a Wonderful Life.
Love that movie.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
Favorite ice cream flavor?
Ooh, mint chocolate chip.
And What do you do for fun?
Outdoors. I like to fish, hunt, and camp. So I tend to be outdoors whenever I can.
That's the opposite of me. So you mentioned pizza as your favorite food dish. So is that deep dish pizza or thin crust?
Thin. Got to go thin.
Now we're going to move into word association. So tell me the first thing that comes to mind when I say the following words or phrases to you.
All right. My wife's going to shoot me probably, but go ahead.
T-ball.
Fun.
Chris Bryant.
Strong.
Coaching.
Also fun.
Baseball cards.
Great.
Chicago.
Terrible.
Chris Sale.
Smart.
Coach pitch.
Harder than it looks.
Youth baseball.
Fun.
Travel baseball.
Tiring.
Okay. Great. Thanks for all of that. It gives us a little more insight into how you think. So now going back to your longevity as a coach, what would you say has been your biggest challenge or failure as a coach?
You know, I think the toughest thing is remembering that kids don't see the game the way you see the game. I think in writing this book, one of the most important things I learned is that expectation guides perception. And as an adult with lots of years of experience and whatnot, you're able to see the game in a totally different way than the kids are, particularly when they're young. They don't see all the pieces moving together. They see like a very narrow tunnel vision part of the game. And I think it's important for adults just to remember that kids are actually seeing something completely different from what they're seeing. So it helps to try, if you can, to see it through the kids' eyes.
So give us a little more detail on that. So how would you be able to see the kids' view of the game of baseball?
Well, for instance, for a young player or even an older player who doesn't have many years of experience, if they're at bat, it wouldn't do, in my judgment, any good to assume, for instance, that they are watching the ball come out of the pitcher's hand. They probably don't even know to look at that. They're probably really scared up at the plate, and the ball looks like a bullet coming at them. So they don't have the presence of mind to actually watch the pitcher's hand as the ball comes out of it to figure out, is this going to be a breaking ball? Is this going to be a fastball? That's probably just all beyond them. So your ability to coach that kid is you've got to come down several notches to where he or she is and work with them wherever they are. Then once they have the experience, you can build them up and they're not afraid of getting beamed by the ball. Then you can teach them about, okay, study how the ball comes out of that pitcher's hand, and that will give you a jump on deciding whether it's a curveball, whatever it is. So I would say just employing techniques like that would help.
Love it. That's great. Now, when did you come to this realization about kids perceiving the game differently than we as coaches?
A little bit when I was working on the book, which the mistakes book, which sort of coincided with some of my earlier days in coaching and listening to what my son and some of the other kids and later my daughters would say. If you just listen to them and watch them, you can see what they do and don't get just by what they do. So if you watch them a little bit, you'll see, okay, they're not really getting this, or they're not seeing the first baseman drop his glove and know that maybe that's a sign when they can take off and steal a base. So if you watch them carefully, you can pick these things up, I think.
I do find you to be a very observant person. I remember in a game this past summer that you were watching, you noticed a weaker skilled player playing third base in a 14U game on a team which you were the assistant coach, and it might have been a playoff game. I don't remember exactly. But sure enough, the hitter from the opposing team hit a playable ball that the third baseman couldn't handle. So now, from your observations, what is the most important ingredient for success as a coach?
I've never been a head coach, so I'll speak from the cheap seats here. It's a big difference between being an assistant and being a head. I was head coach for one game and found it was a whole heck of a lot harder than it looked. Even though I stand next to the head coach, there's a big difference between the two. But in my judgment, having watched really good head coaches, and I'll embarrass you, I'll say you're one of them, but guys like you and Ed Martinez and Dave Johnson, I think the difference between one difference between really good coaches and guys who aren't so good is the good coaches know what they don't know. They know the limits of their knowledge. The bad coaches don't know what they don't know. They think they know exactly everything from precise hitting mechanics to the A through Z rules of baseball to every little finite detail that can be taught. And I think the really good coaches understand, hey, there's only so much I know. When you get to the next level, you'll pick up more knowledge. And they understand that, and they play within their limitations. And I think that makes for a better team all the way around, better players, better coach.
Yeah, I do notice that as well when I talk with other fellow coaches, that those who seem to think they know it all, they actually are closed off to learning, and that does hinder them from achieving higher levels.
It does, and there's always more than one way to teach a particular skill. There's no. You look at batting stances. You look even in Major League. Go to Major League game. You'll see 5 or 10 different types of batting stances. Albert Pujols has one, and Big Papi has another one, and there's no one way of doing any of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, in your book, Why We Make Mistakes, and I love the subtitle, How We Look Without Seeing, Forget Things in Seconds, and Are All Pretty Sure We Are Way Above Average. Did you come up with that, by the way?
I think I did. I don't think I came up with maybe entirely by myself, maybe with my editor, but I think I was chipping in there. I'll put it that way.
I love that subtitle.
Thanks.
You showed that we all think that we are way above average, and as a result, we're overconfident. So I think one example you gave was when people go to a golf pro shop, and they're trying out new putters. So would you explain to the audience, for those who haven't read the book yet, why people in general tend to be overconfident?
In terms of why they're overconfident, there's theories about why people are overconfident. It's pretty much fact that they are. And to a degree, you can understand why. Overconfidence in a lot of cases is what gets us out of bed in the morning and allows us to do the stuff that we might not otherwise think we could do if we were objective about it. I mean, you can probably think of various things in your life, whether it's applying to a really good college or, asking a good-looking girl out on a date or anything, where if you perhaps objectively assessed your own skill level, you might think, oh, God, I'll never succeed. And so you would never do any of those things. So overconfidence can serve a purpose in getting us over those bumps in life to do the difficult stuff that maybe is at the edge of our abilities or our limitations. But it can also lead us to make mistakes. And it's a pretty fine line between the two sometimes.
So now when it comes to youth baseball, do you find that youth baseball coaches also think they're way above average or overconfident?
Well, there's certainly some coaches I've come across who I think they're way above average. The kids, less so, I would think. In fact, usually I think in baseball, at least on the younger levels, there's more a lack of confidence than an overconfidence. It hasn't gotten there yet. The kids aren't matured. And I think particularly when it comes to offense in baseball, not so much defense, but offense, there's often a real lack of confidence, and that can be really crippling.
Yeah. So now in your book, you also said one of the best cures for overconfidence for adults is quick corrective feedback. Now, how can that be applied to youth baseball coaching?
I personally think that's hugely important when you're teaching kids anything, baseball, soccer, I don't care what the subject matter is, but I'm a huge believer in proper mechanics for kids. And I think, for instance, if you're coaching a baseball team and you're scrimmaging and you see something basic, like the kid goes to field a grounder and he doesn't have his body behind it because he's afraid of being hit by the ball or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think it's wrong just to play on and let the game go, because that bad habit just gets reinforced. I think the way you apply that is you stop it right there, say, okay, what did we do wrong here? And most of the time the kid's not going to think, and he'll probably argue with you, oh, I was too behind. I had my body behind the ball. Mm-hmm. But stop, go over it until that mechanism is in his or her mind, and it just becomes automatic. So I think that's one way that you can give quick positive feedback. Say, nope, that's not the right thing to do. Let's play that play over. Let's go through it motion by motion. Here's exactly how I want it to proceed, and that will be much better for them. That's my theory.
That's great stuff. Now, in your book, Kidding Ourselves, you discuss the effect that confidence or firm belief plays on performance, including placebos. Yeah. You described how medical patients, for example, they improve when they believe in a treatment's effectiveness. So, again, for those of the people in the audience who haven't read the book, could you describe that a little bit more for us?
Sure. The placebo effect, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the placebo effect is basically the part of the drug that's non-medicinal, if you want to think about it that way, and the effect it has. And this is a pretty powerful effect that's been documented pretty much throughout the history of medicine, where, for instance, they will give someone a sugar pill, a fake pill, has no real medicine in it at all. And time and again, people who take these fake pills will report improvement in their condition throughout a variety of conditions. They've done the same thing with surgeries, for instance, where they will give people fake knee surgery. They'll give them little, what they call souvenir scars. And I've had this knee surgery, in fact, where they'll just give them a little souvenir scar, but do nothing inside the knee, no real surgery, patch them up, send them home. Hey, how's your knee? Oh, doc, it's much, much better. And this is true stuff. This gets documented time and time and time again. And it's a very powerful effect in medicine. And I think it's a very powerful effect outside of medicine, too. You know, the old statement, you got to believe, is very much true. And I think it's critically true with kids, particularly in baseball, which, unlike a lot of sports, say soccer, and I like soccer and played soccer, your individual performance is at some point during the game isolated and put on display for everybody, as if you're on stage. You know, when you come to bat, or if you're a pitcher, you're basically all out there by yourself in front of mom and dad and coaches and friends and everybody hanging on the backstop. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have confidence at that point, you're in trouble. So even if it's a false confidence, even if it's a placebo confidence, if you want to call it that, the great thing about placebos is they work. Whether it's real or fake, in essence, doesn't really matter. If it works for you, it works for you. So whether your knee really got surgery or just got the souvenir scar, if you feel better and walk fine, well, it's been successful. It got you where you needed to be. And I think with kids, it's really important to get them where they need to be.
So for kids, for baseball placebos, do you think kids can tell when you're blowing smoke and you're telling them something to boost them up, but it's not really true?
I think they can largely. And for a coach, you in essence have to believe it yourself. Like there's one guy recently on a team, and again, I won't mention names, but he had a hard time the whole season, could not get a hit to save his life. And I would try to work with him. And I think it's also important to the kid to let the kid know that you have an eye on him, that you haven't dismissed or forgotten him, that you pay attention to individual things he or she does. If I see him make a nice play in the field, I will come hunt him down specifically to let him know, hey, nice catch, nice throw, nice backup, whatever, just to let them know that, gosh, the coach is really genuinely taking an interest in me. And that way, I think they know that when you come to them with a suggestion or feedback, whatever you want to call it, a confidence builder, that you're not just blowing smoke, because really you aren't. And there's one player in particular, I worked with him really hard on trying to move his hips in the right way, get his weight behind the ball. And eventually he got a hit right at the very end, huge smile, very happy. And it was very rewarding, I think, for both of us. So I think they can tell when it's fake. And from a coach's point of view, you have to believe it. You have to believe in that kid.
That's a great tip. Now, do you have any other suggestions? How can coaches instill confidence in their players without sounding trite or cliche?
That's a toughest thing. I mean, I've not made a study of it, but just in my own time, I've watched various kinds of famous coaches and I'll switch over to basketball here, from John Wooden on one hand, and I know I'm dating myself, to Bobby Knight on the other hand, also dating myself. Diametrically opposed coaching styles. John Wooden would almost never speak. Bobby Knight, sometimes you wished he wouldn't speak, throw chairs, grab people, do all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But I think the key thing is one way or the other, and it's unique to each kid. Every kid, some kids aren't reachable. Other kids are very shy. Some kids are gamers. They're scrappers. They're tough. Building confidence in those different types of personalities is you have to have a uniquely tailored approach to each of those kids, because the same size won't fit all. But you have to kind of work with them. I've even on occasion, and you may have seen me do this, I've even used my cell phone to either take pictures or videos of a kid early in the season. And because I think they might not believe me and might think I'm blowing smoke up for them, I'll keep that. And then I'll take a picture of them subsequently in the season. And I'll sit down with them and I'll show them the video and say, hey, see, now you think you haven't improved, but let me show you something in the beginning of the season. See here, see how your hips were when you were swinging, see how your eyes weren't on the ball, see how you were missing. Now let me show you your last batting practice, and I'll show it. And then they can see for themselves. And that helps boost confidence.
That's really smart.
So you don't have to believe me. Just take a look at the pictures. Here you are.
Yeah, and that's really a smart tip. I sometimes use the video on the phone to take a picture and show them what they're doing now, but I haven't thought about using video from before and comparing them right on the spot so they can see the difference right there. I think that's really great. So now, on the one hand, overconfidence is bad, and yet on the other hand, confidence is good. So how do we handle our players so that they are confident without being overconfident?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. As I say, I think understanding that we're dealing with kids here, not yet fully mature adults, and at least in at least in my experience, not yet even at the high school level. So you're dealing with basically adolescents and sub-adolescents. I don't think they have enough experience in the world or maturity or whatever you want to call it to yet be overconfident. They're still a little new and tender in the world. So at least at this stage of their development, I think, as opposed to many adults, the effort needs to be put into boosting confidence rather than curtailing overconfidence for the younger kids. Now, maybe once they get into high school, then you have a problem there. Although even, frankly, you've probably seen this too, with a couple of teenagers, boys start hitting the teenage years. Some of them get cocky. They start, chugging down the first base line instead of really running, trying to be cool, look cool when they make a play, instead of just doing the solid mechanics. They've been watching a little bit too much ESPN, Web Gems, trying to flip the ball on a double play or something fancy like that. Then I think you have to come in with a little bit of different treatment to kind of curtail their overconfidence and get them to stick with those solid basics.
Mm. So you think we definitely need to err more on the side of giving them confidence?
I think so, particularly for the younger kids. As it gets older, that may switch around. But I think particularly for the younger kids, so many of them lack confidence that at least in the early stages of their sporting careers, boosting that confidence is hugely important, particularly on the offensive part of baseball. Not so much on the defense, but on the offense.
I love it. That's great. So what do you think is the difference? What makes the difference between a competent youth baseball coach and an incompetent one?
I think a little bit of what I mentioned before about knowing your limitations, knowing what you don't know. I think an incompetent coach, it's fine if you don't know. I mean, everybody's a volunteer out here, right? They're all moms and dads putting in their own time. And so no one here is a professional. Everybody comes from different walks of life. So, no one should be judged as if they were Joe Madden or any other major leaguer. But I think the competent ones are the ones who understand their own limitations and work within those. I think the incompetent ones are the ones who don't know their limitations. They just see themselves as kinds of forces unto themselves. And I think those guys are not the best coaches.
Yeah. So now, from your observations, and I know there are no stats on this, but just from generally looking around, do you think there tend to be more competent or incompetent coaches?
I've got to tell you, at least judging from my experience in Wells Park, which no fool and I just think is exceptional, I've been amazed at the level of the coaching. I truly have been. The vast majority of the moms and dads that I've encountered have, I think, been wonderful coaches. And I include you in that. Guys I mentioned before, Ed and Dave and a bunch of the others too. I'm not trying to slight anybody, but I have thought, and I've said this to people at my son's school, I said I would have a lot of these guys coach the school team. I think they're that good. So I've been highly impressed by the competence of the coaches.
Okay, and for those who are listening, Wells Park is a league in Chicago that
Correct.
is one of the largest leagues in Chicago. So just to clarify that. And so now you've said one reason we make mistakes is that we act one way, but we actually act a different way from what we think we act. So do you think this applies to youth baseball as well?
It does, I think. In some respects, I've been struck, for instance, when you try to give a kid feedback on either offense or defense, they will, and you may have had this experience as well, very frequently disagree with you about the very fact of what happened. Whether it's, for instance, as I mentioned before, a simple fielding play, and you'll tell them they did not square up on the ball and get their body behind it. No, I did too. They think they did maybe, but they didn't really. Or when batting, for instance, and you'll tell them, hey, you didn't keep your eye on the ball all the way through. And they'll get defensive and say, yeah, I did. I watched it all the way. Or, you're not keeping your weight back. They'll argue a lot of times and not see themselves as you see them. They'll see it differently. So I think they think they're acting one way properly. But I think in reality, or at least as I see it, oftentimes they're not. And that's what makes correcting that behavior maybe a little tricky.
Yeah. So how would you suggest correcting those kind of situations?
Again, one thing I've tried, I don't know how effective it is, the camera. If you don't want to believe me, you can argue with the picture. I'll take a picture of a guy in the field or at bat and show them where their weight's distributed or how their weight's distributed, or if they're using their lead leg and stepping way out, or for instance, stepping down to third baseline, I'll show them the picture. Depending on the kid and how he or she reacts to feedback, I'll say, hey, here's the picture. You can look at it. Your foot's doing this or not doing that. Sometimes it helps take a little the pressure or defensiveness out of the situation.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with photographic evidence.
It's hard. They'll do it. they'll do it.
Yeah,
but,
they'll find a way.
But it helps. It can help take the personality out of it, mm-hmm. and just reduce it to basically evidence, at least to the extent that teenage minds want to consider evidence.
Yeah. Now, your son, Jack, he's 13. Is that right?
13 until next week, and then it'll be 14.
Wow. Now, Jack has, from what I've watched him, he's improved tremendously over the past 3 years, and his hitting in particular has become much more authoritative, and he's just a lot more confident when he's up there. What do you attribute Jack's improvement?
In part, but only in part, I think it's physical size. As with a lot of boys in the league, they hit a growth spurt, and your son as well. They start packing on muscles. They're not just little elbows and knees like they were when they first started in the league and weighed 50 pounds or whatever, and could barely swing a t-ball bat. They are starting to become young men, and they've got real muscular power. And I think for each of them, there's a moment one day at practice, fooling around, where they actually get hold of a ball and really give it a ride. And a little light goes on in their head, and they think, wow, so that's how it happens. Mm. And they think, hey, throw me another pitch. And they start whacking it. And pretty soon they start thinking, well, okay, now I'm kind of getting in the groove here. And I think that, at least in part, helps. There's other factors as well, hanging out with other kids, et cetera, watching other kids, stacking up your performance to their performance. But I think for a lot of the boys anyway, once they put a little bit of meat on their bones and can start to give the ball a ride, I think confidence goes up pretty considerably.
Hmm. Now, did you work with Jack a lot, like over the winters or anything like that?
I've tried, although I think you and I have talked about this. I know I've talked about with other of the coaches like Greg Deutsch and others. I find it very hard to coach my own son, and I think other dads I've talked to report the same results, that sons never want to listen to their own dads. It's almost pointless. In fact, oftentimes I've turned to you or other guys and said, will you talk to my son about such and so, because there's no point in my discussing it. It just will be disregarded simply because it came from me. So I have tried to work with him. A lot of evenings we'll go out and throw 25, 50, 100 pitches maybe on a good night. Not full power, but 50 to 75% power, just to keep fresh, because here in Chicago, obviously we have, with weather, a very limited season when we can play outdoors. So I'll try to work with him as much as I can, build his confidence, but mostly I think it's him. Hmm.
What's your best tip for your fellow coaches?
I think just to understand that for most of the kids you coach, they may look at what you look at, but they're not seeing what you see. And at least until they get much older, you've just got to accept that they're just not going to see the game the way you see it. So you have to go see it the way they see it, which is almost a little frame by frame, tunnel vision, one step at a time approach, and not the overall way a coach looks out at the field and sees 5 or 6 different things. You got to understand that most of the kids, at least until they get older, most of the kids, if you just get them to stop playing in the dirt, that's a major achievement for some of these kids. So you just got to come down to their level and set a goal for each of those kids for the season. Say, okay, so for this kid, my goal for this kid is just to get them from here to there, whatever you think might be a reasonable step for that kid, and let that be your sign of progress.
So would you share that goal with them, or would you have them try to come up with their own goal as well?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it depends on the kid. If they're older or maybe more mature, I might say, hey, here's what I want to work with you on this season. This season may only be, depending on where you live and whatnot, it may only be 10 weeks long or 12 weeks, whatever it is. So coach has a limited amount of time. So with a certain kind of kid, it may do well to say, okay, here's what we're going to work on this season with you. We're going to work on your pitching, your throwing, making you a better base runner, stealing, whatever, was some little aspect of the game. And those kids may be good with that. But I think it all depends on the mentality of the kid, because kids are so variable. Some kids, it may work better where if you don't telegraph that to them. You just kind of quietly work on certain of their skills, and they don't even know what you're doing, but they might absorb it.
So is there a certain personality type of a kid that you would, want to let them know versus not let them know?
Yeah, maturity is the large factor, but at the risk of falling into what I would consider to be coach ease, a certain kind of way that maybe coaches think and speak. If I've got a kid who's a gamer, what I consider to be a gamer, by which I mean a real scrapper, a kid who likes to mix it up and isn't unduly afraid of failing, that's a kid I can be very direct and one-on-one with, because I know his ego won't get hurt by anything. And I think he'll take it. I think he'll understand it and try it. You can suggest stuff. Some kids will take, some won't. And if it doesn't work, then you got to go to plan B or C or D. I think if you give me a kid who's a gamer, he or she will take that direct instruction a lot better maybe than some other kids.
Yeah. Now, baseball, as you know, is a very humbling game, and I've learned a lot of lessons over my years of coaching, and I can tell a story of one time my son was 10, and we were in the playoffs. We had a very good season, and it was our second playoff game, and I was, again, overly confident of how we would do in this particular game against this particular team. So our starting pitcher walked the first three batters that he faced, and I was so still overconfident, super confident about our chances that I left him in there. He proceeded to walk two more guys, and we had a 3-2 lead at the time. We ended up losing 9-3, and we were out of the playoffs. And it was a very humbling experience for me, and that was one thing that I learned. One of the things I learned was to, watch my pitchers and not let them go too far. If they don't have it, they don't have it for the day, and to not overestimate my team's ability and underestimate the other team's ability. So for you, what lessons have you learned over your years of coaching?
I had a similar experience actually with my own son on the mound. And I think that's one of the toughest things to know is when and under what conditions to pull a kid who's having a rough time on the mound, because depending on the makeup of the kid, the psychological damage that can be done out there is pretty huge. So it's a tough time to know when to intervene. I think that is, as a coach, that's a tough thing. You want to, it's a fine balance. You think, okay, the kid will rebound. On the other hand, you also want them to toughen up. Every pitcher, at least at our level, you've got to have some mental fortitude to, walk some batters and get yourself through it. So it's a very fine line, and I don't know that I've mastered the ability to walk that line yet.
Yeah. And I've seen that this year as well. It happened on several occasions where I'm overhearing other teams' coaches saying, should we pull him? No, let him fight it through. So are there any guiding principles in that particular area regarding pitching? Like if a kid's struggling, do you have any guidelines and that might help you, rules of thumb that when to take them out or whether to leave them in?
Well, it's tough because depends on your bullpen, right? I mean, if you've got nobody else you can put in, either because the kids have already reached their pitch counts, or your better pitchers are not there, or whatever. You look like any coach, any manager. You look at your bullpen and think, "Oh boy, what have I got there?" And then you got to weigh that against the kid on the mound. Is he mentally tough? Is he a gamer? Is he a little bit more fragile?
If he was fragile, Joe, let's say he is on the little more, kind of handle with care side. Is that a kid that you would want to leave him in to try to figure it out himself? Or would you say, you know what, let's not let him inflict more brain damage on himself if he continues to struggle?
I think now I would probably opt for pulling that kid. It all depends, but I think now with experiences I've had, I think I would probably opt for pulling that kid and keeping his psyche together and maybe saying, all right, we'll play another game another day, and we'll pull him and substitute him and see if we lose a game, we lose a game. But I keep that kid's confidence reasonably in, where it should be. And I'll try him again and hopefully I have a better start and we'll go from there.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I'm leaning as well. And I think that if a kid is struggling and he's kind of fragile to begin with, I don't think it will get any better.
Yeah.
So I think it would be better to just pull him aside and say, hey, sometimes even major league pitchers, they don't have a certain day. We'll give it another go, and you'll do much better next time, and just kind of wrap that up.
Yeah, some days even major leaguers, they don't have it. And out of all the positions on the field, I think pitcher is the most mental one. It's unlike anything else. And famously in the major leagues, you get pitchers who are, a lot of them are crazy guys. We just, Papelbon, we just saw what happened there. And, they're a very interesting breed of person. And you've just got to watch their psyches. And that's true even when they're kids. You don't want things to go haywire on the mound. So I think oftentimes it's better to just take the short-term loss and hope for the long-term gain, pull them, keep their psyche intact, and then put them back in and try to build them up as much as you can.
Yeah, that's great. And for those who might be listening to this podcast later on in the future, the Papelbon incident is referring to when Papelbon choked his teammate Bryce Harper in an argument. And Papelbon was, he's the new guy on the team, and Bryce Harper is obviously the star of the Nationals. So anyway, that's the kind of craziness that we see.
That's what you get.
Yeah, that is kind of wild out there. So what skill is most important to you as a coach when you evaluate a player?
It's changed, I guess, a little bit. I used to look more for physical skill, and in a way, you can't beat physical skill. A kid who can actually, hit, pitch, throw, run, those things are hard to beat. That said, more and more, I'm looking for a kid with the right mentality. If I mentioned before whether he's a gamer or not, but you give me a kid who's got the right stuff between the ears, you can work on the skills. And a lot of kids can have a very rapid uptake on the skills. I've seen it happen. You obviously can't replace a body. If a kid's a 6 foot, 180 pound, work of nature, it's hard to beat that. But that said, you give me a kid who's got the right mentality, the right approach, you can teach the skills. but you can't teach the mentality, I don't think. So more and more when I look for kids, I look for kids who got that right stuff, if you want to use the cliche. But if they have the right attitude, the right mentality, a willingness to learn, a kind of mental toughness, those are the kids that I want to coach.
Okay. And of those various character attributes that you mentioned, willingness to learn, coachability, toughness, which of those would you say is most important in your eyes to a player's success?
Particularly in baseball, although probably any sport, but I think particularly given the nature of baseball, I think perseverance is probably the premier mental quality. If you give me a kid, because baseball is so much a game of failure, again, particularly on the offensive end. I think, I forget what it is. The year to year, the combined batting average in both the AL and the NL, I think hovers right around 250. It may vary a little bit, but not much. But, which means basically you get a hit, one of every 4 at bats, more or less. So you fail 3 out of 4 times. And to succeed in that kind of environment, you need to be able to persevere. You need to be able to go up, fail, get up, do it again, fail, and go back and do it again. And a kid who's not wired to accept that high degree of failure, I think will have a tough time with baseball. Whereas a kid who's got perseverance, who doesn't let that kind of failure affect his view of himself, if you want to talk about his self-confidence, his self-esteem, that quality I think is pretty rare, but very valuable. And I think a kid who has that will do well, not only in baseball, but in other things.
Yeah, I love that. And that's I couldn't agree more. I think that because, as you said, baseball is a sport of failure, and baseball is by far, of all the other sports that are out there, at least the team sports, there's so much failure in baseball compared to the other sports that perseverance is definitely highly valued.
Yeah, baseball is, and it's, again, it is unique in regards to other sports, football, basketball, soccer, field hockey, whatever you want to compare it to. It's got a lot of failure in it. Virtually every aspect of the game is quantified with some number, batting average, on-base percent, whatever, that a kid can look up his batting average compared to everybody else on the team or whatever, and instantly start feeling terrible about himself and come up with 5 reasons why he ought to quit. And, whereas if you're playing soccer, it's 11 kids, they're running around in a scrum, everybody's chasing the ball, nobody has a batting average, nobody's performance generally is isolated from the larger group, and there's no individual failure generally. Whereas if you get up and you strike out, well, that's an individual failure. So I think it really is essential in baseball that you have that type of perseverance to get you through those difficult times.
Yeah, and even not only when you strike out, but then the next time you come up to bat, people are going to be mumbling, okay, here's that kid who always strikes out. Whereas in soccer, for example, no one's going to say, boy, that kid, he just can't kick it. Why are they giving it to him? It's just not as easily noticeable in other sports as it is in baseball.
Exactly. And I think that's the key thing you mentioned, that frame of mind is so important, because for a kid, they say in Hollywood, you're only as good as your last movie. Well, a kid playing baseball has his own version of that statement, which is, I'm only as good as my last at bat. So when he's walking up to that plate, if he struck out on the previous at bat, he's probably thinking, oh God, I'm probably going to strike out again at this at bat.
Yeah.
And the odds are tough. I mean, I think I just saw Pujols recently. I think he had the longest drought of his career. I think he was, I may get this wrong, but I think he was 0 for 25. I was watching a game the other night, and that's Albert Pujols, 25. 25 at bats, 0, nada. He got nothing. You have to have a lot of mental fortitude, because people in the stands at that level, people in the stands start chirping about how much money you're making and you can't even hit the ball. You know, at a lower level, like you say, maybe kids are hanging on the backstop thinking, oh, this kid whiffed last time. It takes a lot of mental gumption to get back up there and not wave the white flag. You've seen it, so have I. You've seen kids come to bat after having struck out, and you can just see the defeat in their eyes. They've already given up. Sometimes they won't even lift the bat off the shoulder. Other times they do, but it's a completely half-hearted swing. And that's a hard thing to watch.
Yeah, and I think that might be why we see, some kids, they actually regress towards the end of the season as opposed to improving. Mm-hmm. So any other things that come to mind in terms of why players would regress towards the end of the season, aside from a lack of confidence?
I think the lack of confidence, the thing we talked about, is a big factor for a lot of kids. On the generally opposite end of the skill spectrum, I think some kids regress because they're worn out. I think a lot of kids, between their house team, a travel team, maybe a school team, they just get burnt out. And by the end of the season, they kind of really just don't care. They've just had enough baseball, particularly for the younger guys, I think. And I think the kids that you and I coach, the age level, I think for a lot of those kids, there is just basically only so much baseball or any other sport, frankly, that they can tolerate. It's just like schoolwork. There's only so much homework those kids will do before they just conk out on you and won't do anymore. Like an old dog, they just won't go. And so I think it's true with baseball with a lot of those kids. They're interested, but for a lot of them, if it becomes too much like a job where they got to hit it every single day, unless they're extraordinarily dedicated kids, it's probably too much and they'll burn out. Now, I say that, and I was watching the Little League World Series this year like I always do, and there was one player, I forget his name, you may recall it if you saw it, he played for Pennsylvania. His dad, I think, had been a major leaguer, and his dad and his uncle owned a batting cage facility. And in an interview, he said he is playing baseball, I believe he said, 361 out of 365 days a year.
Wow.
And that's what that's why I thought, boy, you have to be, and this kid probably will be in the major leagues. You have to be a very special kid to play that much baseball. So for more, I don't want to say normal kids, but typical kids, I think a lot of them get burned out if they just have too much baseball.
Mm. Well, I think we've covered an incredible amount of ground here today, and I appreciate you taking the time to share a lot of your thoughts and experience with us, Joe.
Well, hey, my pleasure. I love baseball, and it's always fun to talk about.
And is there a way for the audience, if they want to get a hold of you, where they can reach you, find out more about you?
Sure. If you want, you can just go to the website I have, kiddingourselves.com, and there's a little email tab. If you want to email me, you can just click on that and shoot me an email.
Okay, great. And is there a Twitter handle that you have as well, or no?
I don't.
Okay. Staying simple.
Trying to keep it simple, although that may change here a little bit. Twitter, I think, sometimes can be a little dangerous. I've seen a couple people swear off it lately because they tend to say things on Twitter they probably shouldn't say. So sage advice, I think, but that may change for me.
Great. And Joe has also been generous enough to offer a free copy of his book, Why We Make Mistakes, to one lucky audience member who's listening to the podcast. If you just leave a comment in the episode on the blog side, where we're going to have our show notes for this session, and just leave a comment why the book would help you in your coaching, then we will randomly select one person from there, and we will ship that out to you for free. So, Joe, thanks again for being on the show. We really appreciate you taking the time, and it's been a lot of fun. Been a big blast to just shoot the breeze and talk baseball with you.
Hey, same here, Rob. I appreciate being here and look forward to another season with you.
All right, great. Thanks, Joe.
All right, buddy.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Joe Hallinan. A lot of thought-provoking stuff, diving into the psychological part of the game, which is often an underappreciated part of the game. You know, coaches are not just coaches and teachers, but coaches are also psychologists, disciplinarians, strategists, motivational speakers, chauffeurs, statisticians, and a whole host of other responsibilities. Psychology, though, permeates pretty much everything in youth baseball, from where kids bat in the lineup to whether you think kids will get bored with the same drills during the season to whether you tell your outfield defense to play deeper. And I think Joe only touched the surface of how psychology impacts youth baseball, but he still covered a lot nevertheless. I'll have links to some of the resources mentioned in the episode on the website. Just go to youthbaseballedge.com/session2 to get the show notes. And that webpage is also where you will go if you want to win a free copy of Joe Hallinan's book, Why We Make Mistakes. The book is an easy read and highly informative. Just go to youthbaseballedge.com/session2 and leave a comment in the comments section about why the book can help you as a coach. I'll pick a winner at random from all the submitted comments and get the shipping info from the winner, and Joe will ship the book out to you completely free. So again, that's youthbaseballedge.com/session2 if you want to try to win that free book. And now for the announcement. I am stoked to offer a new feature on my website that is in conjunction with a new segment on this podcast. This new feature is called Ask Justin, featuring Justin Stone of Elite Baseball Training. Justin is the best youth baseball instructor I know, and this new feature will give you the unprecedented opportunity to ask Justin any question you have about youth baseball, whether you're a coach, a parent, or a player. So here's how it will work. Go to youthbaseballedge.com/askjustin to submit your questions. Every week, I'll pick one question for Justin to answer from all the submissions I get. And every week, Justin will answer a selected question on this Youth Baseball Edge podcast. The interactive nature of this weekly Ask Justin segment on the Youth Baseball Edge podcast is the first of its kind in the youth baseball media industry, and I'm really excited to be able to serve you in this way. I think you're really going to love this. It's going to be fun, easy, and free. And it's one of the many ways I want to be able to help you with practical, actionable content so that you can get the edge. So that'll do it for session 2 of the Youth Baseball Edge podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to leave a comment at youthbaseballedge.com/session2 if you want a chance to win the free book, Why We Make Mistakes by Joe Hallinan. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and leave an honest review. It will help the show immensely. On our next episode, we'll be talking about something that isn't discussed much in youth baseball, proper infield play. You know, there's a lot of hand-wringing about pitching and hitting, but we don't talk much about infield work. And that's probably because when it comes to teaching how to play infield, we as coaches are more likely to think, I got this, and that there isn't much to it. But when we talk about this next week, I think you'll see that there is more to it. So we hope to see you next time. And until next time, be blessed and be a blessing. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Youth Baseball Edge podcast. You can find us at youthbaseballedge.com.